Good afternoon, everyone. It is officially afternoon on the East Coast, Eastern Standard Time. It is 12:12 on March 8th, 2023. Continuing here, and I think I did this for 12:15, so I'm not sure. Maybe I should wait a minute before I read. Okay, so let's talk news, right? So I officially downloaded, or not really downloaded. I'm on a dating app, guys, and it's so weird. Like, I think I hate it, but I'm slightly intrigued. But I was cracking up because in here it talks about how Italians are like our temperament, right? Like we're warm, and easily distracted and into like good food, stuff like that. And so I'm over here trying to stay focused. Like I'm trying to like weed through all these messages I have on this app. It's actually the Facebook dating app. It's not really an app, but I'm trying to weed through all these messages. And I did try a Catholic app first, by the way, but there was nobody from my area on there. Surprise, surprise. And so I'm trying to weed through all this stuff, and yeah, and I'm like so easily distracted. So I'm like, all right, no Protestants, no agnostics, none of this stuff. But then somebody pops up with, he's actually a very well-known, like deep sea charter fisherman guy in our area. Like everybody knows his boat sort of thing. And he's on there and he starts talking to me and I'm like, okay, I'm like, I got to stay the course. So he's like a Protestant or whatever. And I'm like, nope, that's not going to work. But he started talking about like what he sells to the local fish marts. And so I'm over here like so distracted by like shrimp, like fresh shrimp off the boat. I'm like, I had to stop. So I might have to get off of this because I don't think anything good's going to come out of it. But I am good for me for trying to, I guess, move on past my situation. But it's hard. Like I'm going to have to really, if I stay on it, I'm going to have to keep myself focused. But it was so funny because he was like, oh, let me take you to lunch tomorrow or whatever. He said that yesterday. And I was like, well, I don't really eat on Wednesdays. And then I had to go into the whole I fast for sinners sort of thing. And then he started talking about shrimp and he's like, wait a minute, you don't eat at all? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, but never mind the sinners. Like, talk to me about this fresh shrimp that's coming off the boat. Like, so anyway, that's where I'm at right now. And I was just, Blessed Anna Maria Taigi needs to pray for me, please. She needs to help me stay focused. Say hello, Lucci. I didn't even hear you. She took her collar off, so she sneaks up. She has no more bell. She hates the roll collar, and she rips it off. Say hi, Lucci. All right. So anyway, we are going to get back to Blessed Anna Maria Taigi, and we are going to stay focused. We're going to block out the Protestants. And listen, for some fresh shrimp off the boat, I might be willing to forgive the fact that y'all stole our scriptures. I might be able to. I'm not sure. That's the problem. So anyway. Chapter 3 is pretty short. It's called The Royal Road of the Cross, the love of abasement, patience, and continuous mortification. All right, so this is Domenico talking about the peace in the house. Is Catman, you're not eating my protein shake. Thank you anyway, Luch. So he says, this peace was bought by the Beata by a constant spirit of renunciation. Our Lord gave her this golden advice. My daughter, spiritual profit consists neither in penance nor in the frequentation of the sacraments. Nay, not even in abiding sorrow for sin, but in the union of your will with mine. Those who wish to follow my way must renounce their own will everywhere and in all things. Do what you do not wish to do. Leave undone what you wish to do. One act of violence to oneself of this kind is much more pleasing to me than an entire year of penances. You must not for the future use such language as, I want this, that is pleasant, that other thing unpleasant, and I would much rather not do it. Such is the language of the world. She herself comments, Cardinal Pedicini, Cardinal Pedicini interpreted the necessity of renunciation in the following words. To acquire the love of God, one must always pull against the stream and never cease to resist one's own will. Every page of the process assures us that she carried out her instructions without, of course, advising us to regulate our conduct by hers. Every soul has its own way and graces to follow that way. And he is a fool who, without taking thought, would imitate Benedict Labre, for instance. And I think that's like a super important point. She didn't boss people around, and I have that problem. I'm like super pushy, and so I needed to hear that. So like she says, every soul has its own way and graces to follow, and so she never held people to her standards. She held herself to her own standards and didn't hold other people to her standards. I think that's important to remember. She made a formal pact that so far as it rested with her own will, she would never allow herself any satisfaction of the senses, nor any pleasure, nor sinful pleasure, obviously, and no pleasure that might lead to sin, but not even innocent pleasure. Someone may say that it was principles of this kind that led the Jansenists and Mother Angelica into folly. So they're not talking about like the holy EWTN Mother Angelica, they're talking about Mother Angelica of the Jansenists, which is a heresy. For Mother Angelica, it is said, was as proud as Lucifer and imposed renunciation more on others than on herself. It was otherwise with Anna. She was humble and made her severe laws for herself alone. She was charitable to all, but if she felt a spontaneous attraction towards anybody, she restrained herself. Whereas if anybody had done her an injury, she was lavish towards such a one. If she was inundated during prayer with divine consolation, she cut her prayers short. If she was desolate, she prolonged them. Wow, I don't do that. I do the opposite. How about you? It was doubtless this spirit which canceled the objection of the devil's advocate who accused her of extravagance on the evidence of one good woman who said, whenever I went to see her in the morning, she always offered me a cup of coffee or a chocolate. The devil's advocate may also have been influenced by the woman's added comment. It is true that in doing so, she was conforming to the Roman custom. Be humble, be patient, she used to say often to her spiritual daughters. She once talked to our Lord about a certain soul, and our Lord said to her, tell her to be humble with everybody without exception, submissive to everybody without exception, obedient to everybody without exception. She obeyed this advice herself, for all her directors note that though she was gifted with extraordinary visions, her humility was so great that she obeyed in every detail not only her confessors, but so far as that was possible, all the members of her household. Never did she lose sight of her own nothingness. Whosoever lives in fear, said our Lord to her more than once, will never fall. But whosoever fears not has already fallen. If you love, you must fear, and yet your fear ought to be full of confidence. Let not your heart be afraid, for if the enemy sees that it is, he will speedily vanquish you. By humility will you find the middle path. He who wishes to be my disciple must walk in my footsteps, for he that bears humiliations with faith and love, he is my son. Suffer scorn and contempt with humility for my love's sake. Keep silence and bow your head, saying, I deserve worse, for my spouse has suffered much more. You must constantly desire humiliations, for it is by this way that you must sanctify yourself. She would never play the foundress when little religious coteries begged her to take her hand, and this honor she had of all ostentation resulted in some quaint episodes. Marie Louise de Bourbon, daughter of the King of Spain, one time Queen of Etruria, and later the Duchess de Luches, owed many cures to Anna, had a fervent affection for her, and called her sister. If in the streets of Rome, when walking with her entire retinue, she caught sight of the lowly working woman, she would run to her and greet her, kissing her hand. Annette, if she saw the royal cortege, would slip down a side street or into a shop or hide in the shadow of a gateway. Yet she never tried to evade one of those shrews who persecuted her. He that is humble is patient, our Lord had told her. The soul that suffers patiently the tribulations that come from creatures is greater than a penitent. My true disciple is he who ever equable in himself suffers interiorly and exteriorly without allowing himself the least complaint against anybody whatsoever. He that has patience enjoys all things here below and is in exception of a crown at last. That is in expectation of a crown at last. To suffer and to deny oneself, Annette had not to suffer and to deny oneself. Annette had not read the Stoics. Her strong point was not in elaborating thesis, but in shouldering in practice the burdens she praised in words. From the beginning of her call at the age of 21, God gave her such a thirst for austerity and expediation that one is terrified at its manifestations. In her mind was a Europe prostrate with misfortune, where yet no one was content with his lot. Debauchery gave place to murder. Think of the House of Orleans and the royal palace, asylum of profligates and notorious libertines. So the libertines, from what I understand, are like our liberals. Like actually, our liberals are more like communists today, and then our Republicans are really the liberals. So I think it'd be more of the Republicans that are the libertines. But anyway, the liberals of the day. So the notorious libertines, where wives were treated like harlots. The affair of the necklace raised but a corner of the veil, which curtained a society rotten to the core. Think of Laclos, the depraved novel writer, the companion in orgy of the Duke of Orleans, the pillar of the Club of Frenzy. Champart, Marmontel consigned religion and all moral and social order to the pillory of abuse. In 1791, even their wishes were surpassed, and Marmontel in particular was so distraught by the amazing upheaval that he committed suicide, cutting his throat. This revolutionary of the Academy would have found in Annette's doctrines all that was necessary for the happiness of humanity, about which he never ceased his affected lecturing. Providence taught its lesson to the world in a way that left no escape, the way of suffering. Indeed, it was not only the philosophers that wanted the lesson. Ecclesiastical dignities were almost entirely the perquisite of the wealthy classes, wherever the Bourbon authority held sway. It was not the custom to serve others, but rather to be served by others and to consider oneself superior to the code of morals that the common people were expected to keep. The unedited memoirs of Monsignor Luquet show that here and there existed monasteries where juniors were invested with clerical office almost as late as 1850, 10 years after Anna's death. Sad survivals of an ancient regime, hotbeds of scandal for which Anna had to make reparation. As to a spirit of penance, herein she equaled the greatest ascetics. Our Lord appeared to her as when Pilate said, "Behold the man," inviting her to share his sufferings. Voluntary exterior penances, he said, are sometimes the price one has to pay for the grace to bear, and not to faint under the involuntary interior tribulations of heart and soul. Her fasts were perpetual. She ate like a sparrow, complained Dominica. In the morning, on returning from Mass, she had a little cup of coffee. At midday, a few drops of soup and a morsel of meat. She did not sit down, but waited at the table on the others, including the servants. The first and the best for the old mother. Domenico? Of course. The oldest must be served first, but why not sit down? Why not make yourself easy? Well, Domenico, when the prince takes his meal, does not the servant stand ready to serve him? Did I not become your servant from the day you took me to wife at St. Marcel? Domenico would be flattered and smile, and consequently failed to observe that if she poured out something to drink for him or scraped cheese into the soup, she forgot to do the same for herself. But he was not entirely unobservant. My wife was very self-denying, especially on Fridays. We may add that she had fasted, especially also on Saturdays, when she was content with morning coffee and midday soup. On Wednesday, in honor of St. Joseph, it was the same. The Lenten 40 days was not enough for her. She added other periods of 40 days. Whenever there was some specter of public misfortune to lay or some soul to save, and even what she ate, she contrived to make a little penitential. She would put aside for 2 or 3 days the meat she intended for herself, and if her daughters remarked that it stank, she said she preferred it like that. She was naturally disposed to thirst, and in the sultry heat of Rome suffered continually, yet used it as a splendid opportunity for sacrifice. It was her absolute rule not to drink between meals, but more than this, when at mealtime she had filled her glass, she would drink only in tiny sips so as to mortify her thirst. Then she would serve her children and not return to her glass till considerably later. Eventually, Domenico noticed her devices. "What are you at? What is this all about? You are toying with your glass. Come, drink it up quickly." Anna smiled and drank half a glass of water. The youngest daughter also would call her father's attention, saying, "Papa, Mama is not drinking." Domenico would then fill his wife's glass and bid her drink it in his presence, and this led her to rebuke the little spy. "It is not well, child, to notice at table who eats and who does not eat, who drinks and who does not drink. You must correct yourself of this bad habit." If it were a question of delivering a soul from purgatory, she would go a whole day, 2 days, even so we are assured 8 days without drinking anything at all, and that at the height of the terrible Roman heats. She admitted to the Monsignor Natali that her thirst on such occasions was enough to make her throw herself into the nearby fountain to quench the intolerable burning. Domenico knew not what not Domenico knew not to what saint to commend himself, torn as he was between affection and respect. "You eat nothing, Anna." "But I do eat, even as you do, and in moving about to serve you, I help to masticate and digest. Besides, you sleep deeply after eating lightly. It is not said that the air here in Rome obliges one to keep a light stomach." "There was no more to be said," comments Domenico. Anna, like her mother, was very fond of sweets and would, naturally speaking, have become a glutton. Now Domenico brought back from the prince's table the leavings of sweets, ices, and sherbets which formerly had been the favorites of his wife. She thanked him, praised the delicacies, and touched them to her lips, but hastened immediately to distribute them to her mother and the children. "But at last take this ice," Domenico would say. She hurried to do so, but making a face would say, "Ugh, how cold it is! How cold it is!" Domenico would shrug his shoulders. "You are an idiot. Of course it's cold. It's ice. That is exactly why I brought it for you. You do not understand anything about anything." On the contrary, she understood everything quite well, even gratitude, and so handing that same ice to the children, she would say, "Taste how delicious it is. Taste the good things Dada brings us." Stern with herself, she was all mildness to others. The servants and charwomen could easily have been embarrassed by her austerity, but she herself served them, giving large helpings and being delighted to see them enjoy good meals. Domenico tells us how his wife, during her illness, had a maid and another woman attendant, and would not be content unless they ate in her presence, for she feared that otherwise they would be undernourished. When she was not confined to her bed, she gave them a large helping of everything. What she gave was more than sufficient. She also instructed them in their religion and frequently took them with her to Mass. It is still Domenico that tells us, for he went from point to point of the long questionnaire with patient docility, that she kept careful custody of her senses, above all her eyes. In spite of her vivacity, she saw nobody but me, her husband. She never took a walk with anybody but me. I never descried in her the slightest departure from modesty. She never allowed herself any caresses or kisses that savored of sensuality. In the midst of the roughest household duties, she was as modestly clothed as if in public. In her suffering, she maintained the reserve and guard of a religious. Her daughter tells us that her mother hardly slept at all at night. Even when she did, she rose habitually before dawn after a bare 2 hours of sleep. She used the time when the rest of us were enjoying the siesta for prayer. Other penances were known to none but her confessor. Hair shirt, chain girdles, bristling with points, scourges, a crown of thorns that she wore during her solitary vigils, yet without ceasing from work. She was, as Domenico asserts, docile to her confessor in the matter of exterior mortifications. It was only after her death that there were found on her the instruments of self-torture that she used. Someone once wrote, "These are the habits of a fanatic savage." But stay, at this period the revolution made heads fall as tiles fall from a roof in a gale. For 30 years, from the Tiber to the Nile, along the Beresina, the shambles were multiplied. Blood flowed in torrents, and many who are not shocked at this homicidal frenzy, or even sing its praises, are shocked at a lowly Christian woman who was willing and desirous by her voluntary sufferings to diminish the involuntary sufferings that were imposed by turbulent spirits who had no belief in the glory of God, but a besotted belief in the glory of men. And that was a short chapter, so I'm going to leave it there. Hi, Katie. Katie is on the bus. All right, I hope you were able to rewind it later or something like that. I hope you're able to watch it. And I have to get going because I have like 6 months of computer work ahead of me that I have to start on, which is good, but it's crazy. So I hope y'all have a great day. Joan of Arc Media out.